They have been asleep for so long. And some of them, they only wake up when they are told it's over. They never articulate anything of substance. They even fail to understand that there is a manifesto that they presented before the people in order to win the vote. Therefore, if all parliamentarians, with all the due respect, are asleep in parliament and also dancing to the same tunes of negligence, then the only voice that can bring about the rebirth of the state will be the voice of the trade unions. Now, we always get into the arguments and questions as to whether trade unions are political entities. And my answer to that is, maybe instead of vilifying them on the basis of political affiliation, we should ask, are they registered as political parties? Yeah. Because in as far as I know, we have, how many political parties? I get confused because even the state of the opposition parties in our country desires a lot. Now I get confused how many political parties we have. But anyway, I don't think Bofepuso is registered as a political party. I know of AP, I know of UDC, I know of BDP. If there are any others, then with all the due respect, I do salute. But however, the trade unions should be free, as Comrade Mohalabu has already said, to affiliate with a political party whose ideals are seen to be advancing that which they want to see. Because obviously, if you are a trade union and the party that is in power does not advance that which you want to see happening, in as far as the workers are concerned, then definitely you have to seek a platform somewhere to somebody whom you can woo, and then they will be able to advance that which you think would work for you. And I don't think there is anything wrong, my fellow citizens, for a trade union or a federation to endorse a certain political party, so long as this political party is seen to be addressing the issue of the rights, the welfare, and the freedoms of the workers. The focus of the trade unions should be on the liberation of the forever oppressed workers. And that should really be their mandate. Paulo Freire says, freedom will never be voluntarily given by the oppressor. The oppressed must find the need to call for their liberation. And Martin Luther King Jr., even within his grave, still subscribes to that ideology. To say freedom will never be given voluntarily by the oppressor. Because the oppressor becomes more viable and more, visible when you are in a state of despair and desperation. Therefore, the trade union movement provides that platform where the oppressed can transform and or emancipate themselves. I'm reminded here of the Bible, taking the people to the promised land. Because you see, for so long a time, a democracy can be so brutal. Or the so-called democracy. And it calls for only a Messiah who can say, in the midst of all these tribulations, in the midst of all these valleys and mountains, I can foresee the promised land. And if you only believe within me, then we shall all see the promised land someday. So I take it that the trade union movement, if our political parties, and especially the opposition parties, are on a slumber, or they are confused, or they have lost it, or they have gone berserk, then I think the trade union movement can provide a better platform to protect the democratic process. We are speaking democracy, and that is why I speak with so much power, vigor, and robustness. Because democracy is about the people. So the people must talk about the democratic process. Now, there is an issue of the socio-economic rights of the workers. And like I have said, under a capitalist state, the rights of somebody will be trampled upon, whether you like it or not. And the trade unions and their workers, they need to be granted their constitutional rights. You see, there is something that I find very amazing, that a democracy which is based on principles of constitution or a constitution, it can turn around to hate the constitution to the degree that now you want to really put on some other funny clauses which are meant to suppress the workers. I have a problem with that. Because if the constitution is the Holy Bible, in as far as how the country is supposed to be run, therefore I think we ought to operate on the basis of what it says. I'll give a typical example of what I'm talking about. The constitution of this democracy provides that the trade unions, they should be able to organize, they should be able to strike, they should be able to that. And then after 2011, now that the workers have gone on a platform to say, no, this is not right, we need to see you make these modalities, we need to see, then now you want to essentialize services. And you see, as a scholar, at times I get worried when people cannot make a mere interpretation of jargon. Essential service. What is an essential service? That which when you withdraw labor, there is danger to life. Period.
Hey, that's it. Simple.
Now, I have a problem with the essentialization, for instance, of teaching on the basis of the aftermath of the 2011 strike. I have a problem. Now, if a teacher does not bring a chalk to class, kids are in danger.
Tell them.
Democracy. But I know that the masses in most cases, they transcend the boundaries of oppression. If our democracy is based on the principles of our constitution, then we ought to follow the constitution. If the constitution says let the workers organize, let the workers organize. Because therefore, if we cannot do that, we are going to turn out to become a mockery, a joke of what a true democracy looks like before the eyes of the masses. Interestingly though, when the masses organize, within our constitutions, it also articulates how they can organize within the dictates of law. As my comrade, Salbani and then Boko has articulated. There is a law that is governing how a strike is supposed to be conducted, negotiations are supposed to be conducted, the bargaining council is supposed, and then now this democracy will turn around and have a problem with all that to the extent of killing bargaining council. Yet, provisionally, it's supposed to be there for the workers. So that on its own, it's a socio-economic and political disaster.
I'm ready.
Some other obvious things that a trade union is supposed to do is obviously to protect the wages and advocate for better wages and salaries. And we can go on and on. Some of these things are things that we are aware of. But before I take my seat, I am an educator. And I am an educator within this democracy. A country which has so much love. But there are issues that I think Bofepuso should help us when it comes to the issue of our education system. What we see day in, day out are perennial reforms in education which do not have pragmatic results. Talk, for instance, of the 1977 Education for Garissa. Powerful document. Results, dololo. And then we have the 1994 Revised National Policy on Education. Powerful document. Implementation, results, dololo. And now we have jumped. We are talking about the outcome-based education. And what I always say is, fellow countrymen, at times, especially those who are in parliament, let me give you this one. You see, you don't need to go and read the whole 1977 Education for Garissa or, revise it. No, you don't need to read it. When you get to parliament, just choose two things. And say, for the entire 5 years that I'm here, I'm just going to make sure that the teacher-people ratio is reduced from 1 to 50 to 1 to 20. You don't have to bring another reform. No, the reform is within the answers to the reform itself. So since 1977 in education we are reforming. And it has always been said the teacher-people ratio of 1 to 50 is not a good ratio. 1994 revisions, they say it's not a good ratio. But now, what we are saying is no. We know it's not a good ratio, but now we have to talk outcome-based. You see, let us stop romancing the truth. These are issues in education that when we talk about the declining quality of education, they contribute towards that. Once a teacher is given 50 lives, 100 eyes to worry about, in a period of 40 minutes, what's wrong with you? How are they going to make sure that they have one-on-one with the students? So that is one thing that I think we really need to give attention. And then in as much as of those of you who belong to the mainstream, who disagree with me, the reality on the ground is that not every Botswana kid who is supposed to be in school is in school as we talk today. The issue of access and retention is a problem, which is coming as far back as 1977, 1994, and now we are 2017. And all we are talking about is reform. Whose kid is in the classroom? Whose kid is not in the classroom? And what can we do as a democracy to make sure that kids get the universal access to education? Now our democracy is hit by the problem of fly-by-night institutions, where now everything that has structures claims to be a university. And I think this is an issue that when Botswana Qualifications Authority, the Human Resource Development Council cannot give attention, I'm telling you, like Barr et al. In 1977 in the United States, they said, and I quote, "Our classrooms are becoming murderous," close quote. If we cannot make sure that we control what an institution of higher learning is, we are going to have mushrooming kangaroo institutions getting into this country and murdering our citizens within the classroom. Professor Mohalakwa has already talked about the issue of mother tongue. I'm not going to delve so much on that. Psychology tells us you learn better in your mother tongue. You advance yourself better in your mother tongue. You cry better in your mother tongue. You express your emotions better in your mother tongue. But when we come to education, no, we are all Botswana and we are on nation building. 1966, we have been building. The gospel of we are using Setswana for nation building, I don't get it. South Africa, multilingualism in schools. I was in Namibia some few months back. They are so much advanced. So this issue of mother tongue needs attention. And like I'm saying, I deliberately put this one forward, knowing very well that the mainstream society would not buy into what I'm saying. But all the same, I will say it. We cannot perpetuate linguistic genocide in a country that is supposedly democratic. And at times it's so pathetic when our MPs don't even see the need to articulate these issues. What did you send them to Parliament for? And there is also, my fellow citizens and trade unions, the issue of corporal punishment in schools. Now, you see, this one, I want you to understand it from this dimension, and then I'll take my seat. We are one country, right? But we have, for some reasons, promoted this culture of public versus private. In public schools, those in power are saying the kids in public schools are a problem and you should beat the hell out of them. And us, who are overseeing these schools, whom our kids are not part and parcel of, will take them to the private, where their rights are protected. And the mainstream argument is no, Banaba private. Banaba private. They are this, Banaba. No. And I'm saying, look, some issues, especially the issue of corporal punishment. Under what circumstances really is corporal punishment valid in the teaching learning process? How a kid in the private can learn without being beaten, can learn without being taken to task for failing a test. What is this thing? What is this thing about this society where we want to promote private versus public and the citizens within the private and public are treated differently? I know we have our Setswana which says Tupa, and then an African kid has to be beaten, but I have a problem with that because an African culture by nature is not oppressive. An African culture is a beautiful culture, where if you have to use a stick, you use it for a purpose. But I have a problem, for instance, of the kids of the Basara, who by upbringing Basara do not use corporal punishment in their kids. They go to a school and then within the first 2-3 weeks, they leave the school and society is quick to say, after all, Kibasara. Hey! They are being beaten. They are not used to this thing. This thing does not exist within their culture. Now we are going back to the issue of access and retention. And these are teachers who are not even trained maybe on multicultural issues. To say, how is their culture? How are you supposed to handle them? So I'm saying to you, my fellow citizens, if we are the lovers of this democracy, let us not perpetuate discrimination via public and private. You go to Finland, for instance. The country is doing so well. All we talk about in Finland is a public education. We talk about public education. Teachers are paid very well. And for you to enter the school system, you should have a master's degree. And we pay you, we give you accommodation. And we focus on the education, not public versus private. And even the so-called private, some of them, like I was listening to Comrade Marobela, the so-called private have come nothing but entrepreneurial entities, business. Pay so much money. You don't get value for education. Where is the state? We can't even regulate that which is happening within the private. So for me as an educator, my fellow citizens, dear comrades, brothers and sisters of democracy, I'm saying if we have to move forward as a country, these are some of the issues that we have to pay attention to. I salute you for your attention.